This one's by Veritasium, and this one was by Flam. Actually recommended this one, and it's the man who accidentally killed the most people in history. I have heard of this story before. Let's see if my memory is right on it.
One single scientist created 3 inventions that accidentally caused the deaths of millions of people, including himself.
It's crazy how like such small lies just kill a ton of people.
Not only that, they decreased the average intelligence of people all around the world, increased crime rates, and caused 2 completely separate environmental disasters that we are still dealing with today. Part of this video is sponsored by Ren. More about them at the end of the show.
Dude, what if like everything that's happening nowadays is just like it's just like this guy, like what he did before, and we're experiencing the echoes of like what happened like right now, and that's why right now.
In 1944, as a young chemist who had just finished his master's, Clair Patterson went to work on the Manhattan Project, building the first nuclear weapons. His job was to concentrate uranium-235, the fissile fuel for bombs, from the much more common uranium-238. And this required huge machines, mass spectrometers, which separated the 2 types of uranium by their slight difference in mass. After the war, Patterson went back.
Have you guys seen the animation about the nuclear bomb with like the freaking, like it's like an anime, and then the bomb hits and then like the people start freaking like evaporating and shit, like their eyes are like falling out of their sockets. This shit is so fucked up.
Back to grad school to get his PhD. He picked a research project that would take advantage of his experience with mass spectrometers, measuring the age of the Earth. Radioactive rocks
Is that it? Barefoot again?
Are effectively clocks. Uranium-238, for example, decays into thorium, and then protactinium, and then 12 more decays, until it ends up as lead-206, which is stable. The rate of this decay is consistent and can be measured. It takes 4.5 billion years for half of a sample of U-238 to decay into lead-206.
Mm-hmm.
Patterson's PhD project was to determine the age of the Earth by measuring the ratio of uranium to lead in primordial rocks. But to calibrate his instrument, first he used zircon crystals whose ages were known. Zircon is ideal for this purpose because when it forms, it contains trace amounts of uranium, but absolutely no lead. So any lead that you later find inside a zircon, you know must be the product of a uranium decay. Now, Patterson was tasked with measuring the lead content, and another student, George Tilton,
That's
measured
interesting.
uranium.
How did they even find that out?
Tilton's
That's crazy.
uranium measurements were fine. They matched predictions. But Patterson's lead measurements were all over the place, and they were many, many times higher than they expected.
Like, how did somebody, what I mean is, like, not how they found it out, but, like, how did somebody even come to that conclusion?
George's uranium and my lead, not right, Patterson. There was lead there that didn't belong there.
So where was all this extra lead coming from? That mystery would take over the rest of Clair Patterson's life and bring him to the literal ends of the Earth.
In 1908, a woman was driving across the Belle Isle Bridge in Detroit when her car stalled. A passing motorist stopped to help. In those days, cars needed to be hand-cranked to start. He knelt down and turned the crank, and the engine roared to life, a little too suddenly. The man couldn't get out of the way, and the crank handle hit him in the face and broke his jaw. He died as a result of his injuries.
What? It like shook his brain or something?
His name was Byron Carter, and he was the founder
Holy
of his
fuck.
own car company. So he was well connected in the Detroit auto scene. He counted
It must have shook his brain and gave him a concussion. That's the only thing I can think of.
among his close friends the founder of Cadillac, Henry Leland. Leland was so distraught over his friend's death that he resolved to eliminate hand cranks from his vehicles. Leland hired Charles Kettering to create a self-starting car, and by 1911, he had a working prototype.
Hand cranking was difficult and dangerous, and best left to men. But a car that started...
It's difficult and dangerous. Leave it to men.
changed everything.
The world's first
Holy
crankless
shit.
car was the Cadillac Model 30. It was much more powerful than cars before it. It had a top speed of 45 miles per hour and 40 horsepower, double the Ford Model T. The Model 30 was a huge success for Cadillac, doubling the company's annual sales.
Dude, am I the only one that thinks like these old cars look so cool? Like I just love how they look.
But it had a problem. It was deafeningly loud. In internal combustion engines, a piston compresses the fuel-air mixture, which is then ignited by a spark from the spark plug. The expanding hot gases push the piston back down. The problem with the Model 30 engine was it compressed the fuel-air mixture more than previous models. So much, in fact, that often the fuel would spontaneously combust before the spark from the spark plug.
That's a
So
misfire,
rather than
right?
orderly, perfectly timed explosions, you'd get
That's what a misfire is, isn't it? Am I wrong? Help me out, car bros. That's a misfire,
multiple
yeah.
haphazard combustions leading to turbulent pressure waves inside the cylinder. The resulting sound led the problem to become known as engine knocking. Knocking wasn't just hard on the ears, it hurt the engine's performance. It reduced power output and lowered fuel efficiency. The vibrations also damaged the piston and walls of the cylinder, shortening the life of the engine. The good news was that engine knocking could be corrected by changing the fuel. Different fuels can withstand different levels of compression before detonating. N-heptane, for example, will spontaneously combust under only a little compression. Isooctane, on the other hand, can withstand a much higher compression ratio before it auto-ignites, so it's much less likely to cause knocking. To quantify how much compression a fuel can withstand...
Is that what the whole thing is with how much gas costs? Like the premium, the normal, and then like the plus and the premium? Is it just like it can be compressed further? I see.
Scientists came up with the octane rating system.
Oh, there it is. It
They
literally
arbitrarily set
literally
isooctane
said it right
to have a
after.
rating of 100 and N-heptane a rating of 0. Now, real fuels aren't made up of only these two ingredients. They're a mix of lots of different hydrocarbons, but the octane rating tells you what mixture of octane and heptane gives equivalent performance. For example, 98 octane fuel can withstand the same compression as a mixture of 98% octane and 2% heptane. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of 98 octane fuel and put it in this piston, and when I compress it, nothing happens, which is exactly what you'd expect. This fuel can withstand a lot of compression. Diesel has an octane rating of 20, so it acts like a mixture of 20% isooctane and 80% N-heptane. If I put a little bit of diesel in there, let's see what happens with the same compression ratio.
Aha.
There you go. You get a little explosion in there. That's because this is a low octane fuel. I mean, that's what diesel's meant to do. You compress it and it ignites. But you don't want this sort of fuel in an engine with spark plugs. The reason fancy cars demand high octane fuel is to prevent knocking in their high compression, high
I
performance
see.
engines.
Yeah, my car needs like the fucking primo, like expensive fuel. And it was very annoying because like every time I'd go to the gas station, I'd have to buy like the freaking Giga Chad fuel. And it's so expensive.
Kettering wanted to find an additive which would increase the octane rating of ordinary fuel and eliminate knocking in high compression engines.
Lexus, no, I have a Speed Miata.
So he hired 27-year-old
Mazda Speed Miata.
engineer Thomas Midgley Jr. Midgley experimented with all sorts of compounds, from melted butter and camphor to ethyl acetate and aluminum chloride. He later wrote most
Flex,
of them
it's not really a flex. It's not really that expensive. Like the car itself is not really expensive. It's just really rare. And the reason why the car is so rare is because the factory like blew up after 2 years. So there's only 2 years that they made the Mazda Speed Miata.
had no more effect than spitting in the Great Lakes. Ethanol was an interesting exception. It did stop the knocking.
Well, it's not a flex because it's not expensive. It's not like it's It's not an expensive car. It's just hard to find. You can it's not expensive at all.
But you needed a lot of it, about 10% of the fuel mixture for it to be effective. That much ethanol would be expensive and hard to turn a profit on. And Midgley was really after an additive that was cheap, easy to produce, and effective even at low concentrations. So he kept trying. Then he hit on tellurium. It worked wonderfully as an anti-knock agent, but it had a terrible smell. You couldn't get rid of it by changing clothes or bathing. His wife was so offended by the stench that he had to sleep in the basement for 7 months.
Holy shit.
Midgley wrote, "I don't think that, although this doubled the fuel economy, humanity would suffer this smell."
On December 3rd, 1921, after 5 years of working on the problem, Midgley found what he thought was the perfect solution: tetraethyl lead. That's a lead atom right there in the center. This additive was exactly what he was looking for. It stopped the knocking, it didn't smell, it was cheap to produce and readily available. Best of all, you only needed 1 part in 1,000 for it to be effective.
In a call to Kettering, Midgley said, "Can you imagine how much money we're gonna make with this? We're gonna make $200 million,
Oh,
maybe
shit.
even more." That is over $3 billion in today's dollars.
Now, for his discovery, the American Chemical Society gave him the prestigious Nichols Award, and they asked him to do a series of public talks, but Midgley
Oh my
declined.
God.
He and Kettering patented the process for making tetraethyl lead, and they called their new additive ethyl, perhaps so it might be confused with another common additive, ethyl alcohol. They made no mention of lead. Then they teamed up with 3 of America's largest corporations, General Motors, DuPont, and Standard Oil of New Jersey, to form the Ethyl Corporation.
Their marketing was brilliant.
No man can look at the amazing record of accomplishment here in this research division without confidence that these men are going ahead with an eye to the future, looking for new facts and principles which will make...
Dude, these like old school like propaganda videos, like just the way that they sound with like the fucking music.
things better and make life easier for all of us.
It's fucking hilarious.
At the 1923 Indianapolis 500, the top 3 finishers all used ethyl, and the demand for leaded gasoline took
no.
off. To keep up, Ethyl Corporation had to build a new chemical plant in New Jersey, but the project began terribly. Within 2 months of operating, dozens of workers fell ill with lead poisoning. 5 of them died. To address the public outcry, Midgley held a press conference, and there he poured tetraethyl lead onto his hands, and he inhaled it for a full minute.
No.
He claimed he could do this daily without harm.
I can do this all day.
But Midgley knew the dangers. The reason he had turned down the public talks was because he spent much of 1923 in Florida, where he himself was recovering from lead poisoning.
Oh my God.
He didn't go anywhere near his company's product if he could help it.
Oh my God, dude.
Lead is dangerous
Yeah, this guy, dude.
even in small doses. It mimics calcium in our bodies, so there's no efficient way to get rid of it. And like calcium, lead can be stored in bones for years, meaning it can continue to poison the body long after the initial exposure. The organ most sensitive to lead is the brain. Lead breaks down the myelin sheath around axons and prevents the release of neurotransmitters.
Fuck.
That's why common symptoms of lead poisoning are headaches, memory loss, and tingling in the hands and feet. And children are particularly susceptible. Lead exposure can cause permanent learning disorders and behavioral problems. And the dangers of lead had been known for hundreds of years. Already in 1786,
This is why I don't like indoor gun ranges. Mommy.
Benjamin Franklin remarked that lead had been used for far too long, considering its known toxicity. You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced on. He would have been aghast to learn that nearly 150 years later, scientists plan to add lead to fuel. Doctors and public health officials from MIT, Harvard, Yale, and the US Health Service wrote to Midgley and warned them against producing tetraethyl lead. They called lead a creeping and malicious poison and a serious menace to public health. Their concerns were dismissed.
This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline.
No one doubted that a lot of lead was bad for you, but how much harm could a little lead do? By the 1950s,
A little,
millions
but it's like so many people using it. And it being in the air and
of
shit,
motorists
right?
globally were burning lead in their cars and releasing it into the air. Some of that lead ended up on Clair Patterson's zircon samples, preventing him from determining their age. In 1952, he moved to Caltech, where he built a new lab from scratch. Suspicious of environmental contamination, he tore the electrical cables out of the walls to remove the lead solder. He cleaned the floors and benches daily with ammonia and made sure that air was always being blown out of the lab. To go inside, you had to wear a plastic bunny suit. Patterson basically invented the clean room. Inside that room, he turned his attention to the oldest rocks in the solar system, meteorites. All the original rocks on Earth had long since been destroyed by tectonic activity. But meteorites come from asteroids, which formed around the same time as Earth. They have just been drifting through space until they entered the Earth's atmosphere. So the best way to measure the age of the Earth was to measure the age of meteorites.
Patterson measured 5 meteorites, each with 3 different radiometric dating techniques, and he found they were all 4.55 billion years old. That number is within 0.15% of the currently accepted value for the age of the Earth. You know,
Damn.
before Patterson's experiment, people thought the Earth was 1 billion years younger. So Patterson had done it. He measured the age of the Earth. But he wasn't done getting rid of lead contaminants.
Public concern about lead exposure had continued to grow, but President of Standard Oil Frank Howard pushed back, saying, "We do not feel justified in giving up what has come to the industry like a gift from heaven on the possibility that a hazard may be involved in it."
Do you guys imagine like if you were like the devil, right? Like if you were like literally Satan, this is the kind of shit you would do, right? This is the kind of shit you would actually do, because like being like overtly evil is like doesn't really work. I think you would do like these like tiny little evil things that fuck up a ton of people, right?
Scientists funded by the Ethel Corporation claimed that lead was a natural part of our environment and therefore not harmful to people. But Patterson wondered just how natural is the lead in our environment? And he had just the skills to find out.
He began by measuring lead in the oceans. If it were natural, he expected the concentration of lead to be the same regardless of depth. But if lead pollution had increased recently, it would be more concentrated near the surface. He took samples in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans down to a depth of 4 kilometers. And sure enough, lead concentrations were nearly 10 times higher near the surface. Lead pollution was clearly recent, but when exactly had it occurred? To find out, Patterson had to go to Greenland and Antarctica. Ice cores record the level of lead in the air going back thousands of years. The levels of lead in the atmosphere have been elevated for the last 45...
This guy is so fucking dedicated. He's like going to like fucking Greenland and like digging up ice cores,
500 years. All of it is due to human activity, mainly smelting ores to make metal. You can see the rise and fall of the Greek and Roman empires, the dip caused by the Black Death in the 1300s, and of course the spike in the 20th century due to industrialization and tetraethyl lead.
Holy fuck!
So what did this do to
people?
people?
Look how high it went. Look how high it went, guys. Dude.
They had no video games back then. You had to fill out the day, otherwise Kappa.
For ethyl lead. So what did this do to people? Well, Patterson looked at the lead levels in the teeth and bones of recently deceased Americans, and for comparison, he measured the lead in bones and teeth of Peruvian and Egyptian mummies. Since they lived over 1,600 years ago, they would have been exposed to much less lead in their lifetimes. He expected to find modern Americans had about 100 times as much lead in their bones, but results showed it was closer to a factor of 1,000. 20th century Americans had 1,000 times more lead in their bones than their ancestors. Studies of baby teeth revealed that even lead exposure well below the level considered safe resulted in delayed learning, decreased IQ, and increased behavioral problems.
And there is a broad consensus on the part of everybody except the lead industry and its spokesman that lead is extremely toxic at extremely low doses.
A follow-up study showed that those with higher levels of lead in their baby teeth were many times more likely to fail out of high school. As a result of studies like these, the CDC's guidelines for the acceptable level of lead in children's blood dropped from 60 micrograms per deciliter down...
Didn't they used to use that shit for drinking water pipes? Isn't that what they did?
To 3.5.
Fuck.
And as far as we know today, there is no safe...
No wonder we're all retarded.
...level of lead. Globally, lead is believed to be responsible for nearly 2/3 of all unexplained intellectual disability.
According to a study published in 2022, more than half of the current US population, that's 170 million people, were exposed to high levels of lead in early childhood. Those born between 1951 and 1980 are disproportionately affected. The authors estimate that in aggregate, lead caused a loss of more than 800 million
Oh my god, thanks for the follow-up, my gosh, thank you.
IQ points.
And thanks for the bits over. Thank you so much. Holy shit.
The world is...
You ever wonder why boomers kind of seem dumb as fronts?
Less intelligent today because of leaded gasoline.
But there are even more troubling correlations. The US saw a steady rise in crime from the 1970s to the 1990s. Then it abruptly declined. This graph looks eerily similar to a plot of preschool blood lead levels, just offset by 20 years.
What?
The obvious question is, did kids who were exposed to higher levels of lead grow up to commit more crimes than they otherwise would have? You might think this is just a spurious correlation, but the same pattern appears in many countries, including Britain, Canada, and Australia. And we know there's a causal connection between lead exposure and antisocial or violent behavior. A study of 340 teenagers found that those who were arrested were 4 times as likely...
Snakeomatron says, so it wasn't the porn. Wait, are you saying it's okay to go back to fapping? It was the lead, it's not my fault.
to have elevated lead in their bones than similar demographic controls who didn't have run-ins with the law.
Baby.
Now this doesn't mean that lead is responsible for all of the increase in crime, but it's very likely responsible for some of it.
Now, it's tough to estimate the precise death toll of lead. One of its lesser-known effects is a hardening of the arteries, leading to increased cardiovascular disease. A study from 2018 found lead was likely responsible for 250...
Okay, what's causing this? Well, it seems like everything's causing this hardening of the arteries.
No, it's heart disease deaths per year in the U.S.,
Assuming a constant rate over the past century, that amounts to 25 million deaths in the US alone. Globally, the figure may approach 100 million. Most of those deaths are due to Midgley's decision to put lead in gasoline, a substance he knew firsthand was toxic, but he did it anyway to maximize profits. And the problem is not over. Current estimates of deaths caused by lead range from 500 to 900,000 per year. A 2020 UNICEF report warns that 1 in 3 children globally, that's over 800 million children, have blood lead levels at or above 5 micrograms per deciliter.
Can you imagine being responsible for like this level of fucking up the world as like a single person? Like that's even like crazier than like fucking than Mustache Man and stuff. That's crazy.
A lot of this lead now comes from batteries and industrial processes.
So lead is one of the reasons I am dumb. If this guy tested my ancestors in the Inca Empire, Thanks, Corpus.
Fucking Corpus. Thank you so much for the visual.
Still due to Midgley's invention.
Now, after Midgley's success with ethyl, he was put in charge of another engineering project. GM wasn't just making cars, but also household appliances.
Oh,
and fridges had a problem.
Dude, this guy needs to be stopped.
Two most common gases used as refrigerants were methyl formate and sulfur dioxide. One is highly toxic, the other is flammable. Midgley was tasked with creating a safer alternative.
No.
In 1928, he developed a non-toxic and non-flammable refrigerant, dichloro-difluoromethane. GM called this new product Freon. And to demonstrate Freon's safety, during the unveiling at the American...
What is wrong with this guy? What is wrong with him? What is wrong with this guy?
American Chemical Society, Midgley inhaled a lungful of this gas and blew out a candle. In the following decades, CFCs like Freon became very popular and were used as solvents.
Oh, these chlorofluorocarbons, and these
lead poisoning.
These things fuck up the ozone
Freon
layer.
was so safe it ate a hole in our ozone.
Isn't that what it is? Thank you for the bits, Goto. Thank you so much. Too much lead poisoning. Yeah, these fuck up the ozone layer, right? Isn't that the whole thing with it? And like aerosol, like these things.
And aerosols. The problem is CFCs are light and stable. When released into the atmosphere, they climb up into the stratosphere, where they can remain for 50 to 100 years. But if a CFC molecule is hit by an ultraviolet photon of just the right energy, it breaks apart, releasing a chlorine atom. And this chlorine atom can then react with ozone, breaking it apart into chlorine monoxide and oxygen gas. The result was another environmental disaster, the hole in the ozone layer. With less ozone, more UV light penetrates the atmosphere, increasing the rates of skin cancer and cataracts.
Dude, this guy.
Plus, CFCs are potent greenhouse gases. Per kilogram, they produce 10,000 times more warming than CO2. The historian John McNeill wrote that Midgley had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in
He had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. Like, this guy just...
in Earth's history. An agreement to phase out CFCs, the Montreal...
He fucked everything, this one dude.
...protocol went into effect.
What an absolute mad lie.
In 1989. And the ozone layer is now showing signs of recovery, although it will take many more decades to fully recover. In 1940, at the age of 51, Midgley contracted polio and became physically disabled.
What about the atomic bomb? I mean, if you think about it, the atomic bomb probably didn't affect as many people as this guy.
So to help him get up, he devised a mechanical bed controlled by a series of ropes and pulleys. On November 2nd, 1944, while using the contraption, he became tangled in the ropes and died of strangulation.
Wait,
Thanks
what?
to the work
1940 bed polio and became physically... In 1940, at the age of 51, Midgley contracted polio and became physically disabled.
Okay.
So to help him get up, he devised a mechanical bed controlled by a series of ropes and pulleys. On November 2nd, 1944, while using the contraption, he became tangled in the ropes and died of strangulation.
Thanks to the work of Clair Patterson, it became clear that the lead in our environment is not...
What do you think are the odds that he actually got murdered? What do you guys think? What do you think? Yeah, he got fucking murdered because people were fed up with his shit. They're like, you know how much shit you've done? How much you fucked people up? And they just like killed him. And just like pretended like he got freaking strangled in his own thing.
natural. Burning lead in combustion engines spread the toxic element across the planet, into the air, oceans, the snow at the South Pole, and even our bones. Japan was the first to ban leaded fuel in cars in 1986, but other countries soon followed suit.
1986? This wasn't even that long ago.
Algeria was the last to do so in 2021. The UN
2021.
calculates that the elimination of lead from gas saves over 1 million lives per year and $2.45 trillion. But leaded gas is still used, by the way, in piston-driven airplane engines.
Leaf, do you remember 1986? Yeah, I was in Rokinjima.
That's now the largest source of lead emissions into the air in the US. You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced on.
That's so crazy.
When I first learned about Thomas Midgley and Clair Patterson, I was amazed by how much harm or how much good a single person could do to the environment, which brings me to the sponsor of this video, WREN, an organization that's taking action on...
Well, I mean, let's be fair. I don't think it was just him. I'm pretty sure, like, a lot of people knew about this. Like he knew about it for sure, right? But I'm pretty sure, like, he can't... There's no fucking shot he was the only scientist that, like, looked into this. There must have been a ton of other scientists, like, in the government and stuff that, like, looked into this. And they're like, whatever, it's fine. Right? There's got to be a ton of people that knew about this.
Climate change.
There's no way one person was like, yeah, this substance is, like, so good, like, amazing substance. And, like, no one else was like, I don't know about that. Especially, like competitors, right? Surely, like, more people knew about it and that information was suppressed. It's, like, the only thing I can think. There's no way. Like, how is it possible, like, one person said, oh, this is, like, such a great compound, but it's fine, and, like, nobody else looked into it? Like, no shot.
Change. I think it's important that we tackle the climate crisis both by lobbying for...
100%. A bunch of people were like, yeah, this is evil, but we're gonna get filthy, stinking rich. And so they just fucking did it anyway.
Systemic change, and by making more environmentally friendly choices ourselves. On WREN's website, you can calculate how much carbon you emit and which activities have the greatest impact. And if you like, you can offset your emissions through a monthly subscription. The funds raised go to support a variety of projects that reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. One project I particularly like involves collecting up flammable dead wood from California forests. This helps prevent wildfires. Plus, the collected wood is converted into biochar, a material that locks up the carbon inside for thousands of years.
It's so it's so bad how mismanaged, like, California is. It's actually insane. It's crazy. Like, they have fires literally every year, and, like, they don't manage it at all. It's crazy.
Once you sign up to offset your carbon
footprint. Did you guys know, like, hold on, wait, let me make sure this is true, because I'm pretty sure this is true. Yep, there it is. The El Dorado fire. Did you guys know about this? That the El Dorado fire, let's see, El Dorado fire 2022 casualties. Death of a firefighter, 13 other injuries, monetary damage. $42 million to suppress. It costed $42 million to suppress the El Dorado fire, which was a huge California fire. Do you want to know how it was started? It was started by a bunch of people who wanted to do a gender reveal party at the El Dorado Ranch Park in Yucaipa. And it fucking blew everything up and started this giant fire. It's actually real. Hold on, wait, let me see if I can find the video on it. It's actually real. Hold on. El Dorado fire.
And Rick, you won't believe how this fire started. More on that in just a moment. From our vantage point, the flames have died down a bit, but this is still a very active and dangerous wildfire threatening homes, and tonight it has nearly doubled in size. Let's get you right to some of this video captured earlier today. We want to talk about evacuation orders because, of course, that's what's on everybody's mind out here. The following communities are under a mandatory evacuation order: Forest Falls, Mountain Home Village, Oak Glen, and the North Bench Yucaipa, specifically north of Yucaipa Boulevard and east of Bryant Street. Now, as of tonight, this blaze has grown to more than 7,000 acres with just 5% containment. Investigators say they now know the cause. Someone set off some sort of pyrotechnical smoke device, some sort of firework, at a gender reveal party. That sparked the fire that spread north to the Yucaipa Ridge and is now threatening these communities.
Dude, that's like...
The extreme heat and low humidity
I know it's awful. I know it's awful, but it's so funny. Like, it's so funny.
Residents tell us they've been up all night watching the fire. hoping it would spare their homes. Have a listen.
I know people's lives are probably like absolutely ruined by this, but like you have to admit it's kind of funny.
Watching this fire, first of all, for the last 2 days, watching it grow, I never thought it would come as far as it did, and all of a sudden, it was leaping towards
Oh God,
my
it was
home.
2020. Dude, 2020.
And the fireman was knocking on the door for me to
God, I remember everyone was wearing those.
get out. I had to leave my cats. I grabbed water and my purse, and I went. So since then, I've been in the parking lot praying without ceasing that my house would be protected. And I'm here to say I lived a miracle. God is powerful,
Have I talked about the new LA fires? No, I haven't. But like I actually was like personally affected by one of these fires. There was one time the fire got so close that like they locked down the streets and like you couldn't go into the neighborhood unless like you lived there. And basically everyone was kind of just hunkered down in their houses and stuff.
Prayer.
It was kind of crazy. There was the freaking hills were on fire.
Injuries reported. Rick, as you mentioned, the governor has declared a state of emergency for this fire and others burning throughout California. As for residents seeking shelter, an evacuation center has been established at the Yucaipa Community Center.
Imagine the thumbnail for YouTube. My house got destroyed by a generator.
On Glen Oaks Boulevard. We'll have
Holy
more
shit.
coming up at 11. For now, reporting live in Yucaipa, John Fenolio, KTLA 5 News.
All right, John, we'll talk to you then.
That's crazy, man. Like,